They said the worst part of this job was the isolation. They were wrong. I signed up for what had to be the most isolated job on the planet, fire observation at Lookout 79. Just a rusty, claustrophobic tower perched 10,000 feet above sea level in the high desert of Nevada. From up here, most days I could actually look down on the clouds. It gave you this profound, unsettling feeling of being completely severed from the Earth, a satellite in a fixed orbit. But the isolation wasn't the worst part. The air was. The air up there was thin, dry, and always carried this faint, metallic taste, like you were sucking on old coins. It was a constant reminder that you were somewhere humans weren't really meant to be. The real terror, though, began when the clouds decided to climb, when they didn't just float below me, but rolled in and completely engulfed the tower, sometimes for days at a time. Being inside that thick, sightless fog, it wasn't like being in a cloud. It felt like being submerged in a heavy, cold fluid, like the tower was at the bottom of an impossibly high, above-ground lake. During these whiteouts, the radio was useless. The static was deafening. Not just a gentle fuzz, but a constant, sharp hiss that felt like it was physically clawing at the inside of your ears. And then the tower itself would begin to vibrate. Just a low, gentle, unnerving thrumming. It didn't feel like structural stress from the wind. It felt organic. It felt like a heartbeat. 2 nights ago, the fog was the thickest I'd ever seen it. I'm not exaggerating when I say I couldn't see the railing that was just 3 feet in front of the window. The thrumming was more intense than ever, vibrating the cheap metal desk where I sat, making the water in my glass tremble. And then suddenly it stopped. The radio static cut out completely. It was replaced by an absolute profound silence that was so deep it made my ears ring. The absence of sound was more terrifying than the noise had been. That's when I saw the movement. It was faint at first, just a barely perceptible disturbance in that white blanket of fog right outside the east-facing window. A shadow. But it wasn't the shadow of the sun or the moon. It was a dark, amorphous shape that moved with an alarming, impossible speed. Far too fast for the wind, far too large for any bird. It just zipped across the window, visible for maybe 1/10 of a second, leaving a momentary streak of pure blackness against the gray. I just stared, my heart hammering, adrenaline making my vision hyper-focused on that spot. The thrumming in the floorboards started again, stronger this time. That metallic taste in my mouth became so strong it was almost painful, like my fillings were about to dissolve. And then the shape returned. It didn't zip across this time, it settled. It was right outside the window, pressed up against the glass. And it wasn't amorphous anymore. It was huge, dark, and perfectly vertical. It looked like a column of pure, shifting blackness, but it had depth, a strange dimensionality to it. And from this central column extending horizontally were these thin, long, segmented limbs, far too many of them. They seemed to unfold from the blackness with a horrible, silent, mechanical precision. The central column then pulsed, and from its middle, a field of light emerged. It's hard to describe. It was a light that was both intensely white and utterly black at the same time, like staring into a perfect void. It was an eye? A sensor? Whatever it was the uncanny valley of presence. It was studying me. I backed away, my hands clamped over my mouth to stifle a scream. The air now tasted like ozone and iron. I glanced at the door. I was trapped. There was nowhere to go. I was in a metal can on a stick, 10,000 feet in the air. Then the creature began to scrape gently on the window. The sound was soft, sickeningly slow, like fingernails tracing a delicate, deliberate pattern on the cold glass. It wasn't trying to break in. It was communicating, or maybe just observing its specimen. It sees me now. I waited out the entire night, huddled in the corner of the room, listening to that gentle, rhythmic scrape. The sun finally rose, its light burning away the fog with agonizing slowness, and then it was gone. The scraping stopped. The tower stopped thrumming. The metallic taste in my mouth faded back to normal. I waited for what felt like an eternity before I could force myself to move. I staggered outside onto the observation platform, blinking in the new morning light. The railing is made of thick, heavy steel, decades old, built to withstand anything the mountain could throw at it. But spanning the entire length of the top rail, visible in the faint morning dew, was a set of impossible markings. They weren't scratches or smudges. They were a series of hundreds of tiny, perfectly formed three-pronged indentations stamped neatly into the cold, dense steel. They formed an intricate, repeating geometric pattern. Looking closer, I saw the metal wasn't just dented. The edges of these tiny footprints, they were melted. I went back inside, packed my bag, and left the radio sitting on the desk. As an afterthought, I hit rewind on the old tape recorder I used to log broadcasts. I played back the recording from last night, and there, buried deep beneath the hours of endless hissing static, a new sound was audible. A low, echoing sound. It was a single, long, drawn-out sigh, like the sound of air rushing back into an impossibly large lung after holding its breath all night long. Fogtales are true if you believe them. Sweet dreams. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the unknown. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You never know what's lurking in the fog. My job involves sifting through the forgotten corners of people's lives, cataloging historical junk, mostly from estate sales and pawn shop backrooms. It's usually a dusty, monotonous affair. But 2 weeks ago, that monotony shattered. A box arrived, filled with old Super 8 film reels. Most were neatly labeled with mundane family memories, Christmas '72, Grandma's 80th. But one was different. It was a small plastic reel, sticky with some unknown residue and completely blank. No label, just the reel itself gave off this wrong kind of smell, a cloyingly sweet odor, like hot, burning caramel mixed with ozone. It was bizarre, but my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to see what was on it, if anything. I mounted the small reel on the old projector in the back room and threaded the film. To my relief, it wasn't blank. The projector whirred to life, casting a flickering image onto the wall. The scene was an interior, a wood-paneled living room straight out of the late 60s or early 70s. A woman sat on a floral sofa, smiling a bit awkwardly at the camera like she was being told to hold a pose. But the camera wasn't really focused on her. The true focal point was a doorway in the background. Standing in that doorway was a child, a boy maybe 6 years old, swallowed by pajamas that were clearly too big for him. His face was unnaturally pale, his eyes wide and completely vacant. He was perfectly still, just standing there, staring directly at the camera. The film ran in total silence for about 30 seconds, then it cut abruptly, flickered, and looped right back to the beginning. The woman on the sofa, the boy in the doorway, over and over. I watched the loop 3 times. It was eerie, sure, but nothing more than a poorly shot home movie. Or so I thought. The 4th time the loop reset, my blood ran cold. I noticed it. The boy in the doorway, but he was closer. Just a fraction of an inch, but it was undeniable. His posture was identical. The shadow he cast hadn't moved, but the geometry of the scene had shifted. He was closer to the camera. I blinked, trying to convince myself it was just the jitter of the old projector, a trick of the light. I let it play again. He was definitely unmistakably closer. My hands started to shake as I grabbed a notepad and began logging the discrepancy. With every single loop, every 60 seconds, the small figure of the child advanced. Slowly, methodically, he crept toward the lens. As his unnerving march continued, a new element entered the scene. A low-frequency hum started to emanate from the projector's motor. This was no normal mechanical sound. It was a deep, rhythmic pulse that vibrated through the desk and made my teeth ache. It felt organic, like a slow, deep breath being drawn in and let out, in and out, in time with the loops. I was mesmerized, completely unable to look away. By the 20th loop, the boy was visible from the waist up. His expression hadn't changed, still locked in that vacant, uncanny valley stare. But now his mouth was slightly open. I focused on his hands, which were hanging limply at his sides. They were wrong. They were too large for his small frame, and the fingers were impossibly long and thin like a spider's legs. The woman on the sofa was still smiling her pleasant, forced smile, completely oblivious to the quiet, monstrous approach of the child in the background of her own memory. The boy's eyes, now huge and black in the frame, seemed to follow my every movement in the darkened room. I felt pinned in my chair. Loop after loop he drew nearer. The humming grew deeper, more intense, a physical pressure in the room. When he finally reached the foreground, his torso filling a quarter of the screen, the noise changed instantly. The deep hum vanished. It was replaced by a sound so clear and so close it felt like it was being generated inside my own skull. A soft, wet sighing, and then a giggle. It was a deliberate, childish giggle, but it was corrupted, strained, like it was being forced through a throat full of crushed glass. The film reached its final terrible loop. The boy's face filled the entire screen. His eyes were right there, inches from the lens, inches from me. They were bottomless pits of black. His mouth wasn't open in a gasp or a scream. He was whispering. I found myself leaning in, drawn by some morbid compulsion. My nostrils filled with that thick, hot smell of burning plastic, stronger than ever. The image held on his face, and I could just make out the words forming on his lips. Then the film itself caught fire. The celluloid bubbled and smoked. The last thing I heard, just before the projector went silent, was that whisper, clear as a bell in my ear. I'm done waiting. In a panic, I lunged forward and smashed the power cord, plunging the room into total darkness. The only light was the sickening orange glow from the projector lens, now covered by a sheet of rapidly melting, dripping film. I ripped the burning reel from the machine and threw it to the floor, stomping on it until the last ember died. The room felt instantly, unnaturally cold. The silence was deafening. I didn't go back into that room until the next morning. I couldn't bring myself to. When I finally did, I went straight for the projector. The thick glass of the main lens wasn't scratched or cracked from the heat. It was changed. It was perfectly, smoothly melted inward, forming a concave dish. And there, stamped into the melted glass as if pressed into hot wax, was an impression. A detailed, perfect impression of a small human palm. It was still damp to the touch. The handprint was the size of a child's, but the fingers were too long. They were impossibly long. I know what it is, it's his hand. He's not in the film anymore, he's in the projector now. Thanks for sticking with me through that story. It's been a lot. If you enjoy this kind of content, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. It really helps and it lets me know you want to hear more. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.